This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in this video we're going to continue our study of Book 2 of Homer's Iliad. It's my desire to get through the rest of the book in this video, which is going to take quite a bit of effort, and we're going to move through it pretty quickly. As we get going into these studies, I'm going to assume that students have been watching prior videos, and therefore I don't have to reteach things that have already been taught and explained in previous videos, and I'm going to try to move more and more quickly. So Book 1 took 7 videos for us to get through, and I'm going to try to get through Book 2 in just 2 videos, and as we go, continue to try and get quicker and quicker. If there's anything that you come across in these books that you'd like to know more about, I ask you to simply get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to talk about any questions you have, but I'm not going to explain every detail in every video, and I'm going to assume, like I said, that students are watching the previous videos, and therefore not much needs to be explained. So let's pick up where we left off here in Book 2. What we saw was that the god Jupiter, in response to the prayer or intercession of Thetis, agreed to act in a way that would remember the glory of Achilles. And Jupiter responds by sending a deceiving dream to King Agamemnon that tells him that Troy has been given into his hands and that he should call the men to arms and go and return to fight against Troy. So that deceiving dream came to Agamemnon. He woke up excited by the message, called his men together, his elder men, the leaders of the Greeks, told them the content of his dream, but then spoke in a rhetorical way to the Greek men, telling them that they should go back home, that they should think of the peace and safety they can enjoy if they return home, and he all but urged them to go ahead, load up the ships, and head home. And this was revealed to be a test that he was using to check the hearts of his men. Ulysses was one who objected to it. Ulysses spoke to the men and called them back from this desire to leave and warned them that if they left, they would live forever in shame. Juno also objected. The goddess Juno objected to the Greeks leaving because she apparently didn't know what Jupiter was doing and didn't understand Agamemnon's intention. And then Ulysses speaks to the people, Nestor speaks to the people, and they urge the Greeks to give up any thoughts of going home, but realize that they've got a war to fight and they owe their allegiance to their king, Agamemnon. And that's where we pick up here. You can see in the document we're on page 68. Page 68 in this document. So we begin with Agamemnon speaking after Ulysses and Nestor have finished. We read, "To him the king says, 'How much thy years excel in arts of counsel and in speaking well. O would the gods in love to Greece decree but 10 such sages as they grant in thee. Such wisdom soon should Priam's force destroy, and soon should fall the haughty towers of Troy. But Jove forbids, who plunges those he hates in fierce contention and in vain debates. Now great Achilles from our aid withdraws, by me provoked a captive maid the cause." So Agamemnon says that Achilles was ridiculous for leaving. "If e'er as friends we join, the Trojan wall must shake, and heavy will the vengeance fall. But now, ye warriors, take a short repast, and well refreshed to bloody conflict haste. His sharpened spear let every Grecian wield, and every Grecian fix his brazen shield. Let all excite the fiery steeds of war, the war horses, and all for combat fit the rattling car, the chariot. This day, this dreadful day, let each contend, no rest, no respite, till the shades descend, that is, until death. Till darkness or till death shall cover all. Let thee war bleed, and let the mighty fall, till bathed in sweat and every manly breast, with thee huge shield each brawny arm depressed. Each aching nerve refuse the lance to throw, and each spent courser at the chariot blow. Who dares inglorious in his ships to stay? Who dares to tremble on this signal day? That wretch too mean to fall by martial power, the birds shall mangle and the dogs devour. So Agamemnon rouses the men to fight, warns them of cowardice, and says, any man who is not willing to die with us in battle, he'll be left unburied for the birds and dogs to tear apart. The monarch spoke, and straight a murmur rose, loud as the surges, notice the simile, loud as the surges when the tempest blows, that dashed on broken rocks, tumultuous roar, and foam and thunder on the stony shore. Straight to the tents the troops dispersing bend, the fires are kindled and the smokes ascend. With hasty feasts they sacrifice and pray, to avert the dangers of the doubtful day. A steer of 5 years' age, large-limbed and fed, that's a full-grown steer. To Jove's high altars Agamemnon led. There bade the noblest of the Grecian peers, and Nestor first, as most advanced in years. Next came Idomeneus, and Tydeus' son, Ajax the less, and Ajax Telamon. The wise Ulysses in his rank was placed, and Menelaus, the brother of Agamemnon, came unbid the last. The chiefs surround the destined beast and take the sacred offering of the salted cake, when thus the king prefers his solemn prayer. O thou, whose thunder rends the clouded air, who in the heaven of heavens has fixed thy throne, supreme of gods, unbounded and alone. Hear, and before the burning sun descends, before the night her gloomy veil extends, low in the dust be laid yon hostile spires. In other words, let the towers of the Trojans be cast to the ground. Be Priam's palace sunk in Grecian fires. In Hector's breast, Hector, remember, was the chief soldier, the greatest warrior of the Trojans. In Hector's breast be plunged this shining sword, and slaughtered heroes groan around their lord. Thus prayed the chief, his unavailing prayer great Jove refused, and tossed in empty air. So Agamemnon, thinking that he's moving according to the will of Jove, is actually moving against Jupiter's will, because Jupiter has promised Achilles glory. Thus prayed the chief, but his unavailing prayer great Jove refused, and tossed in empty air. The god averse, or against Agamemnon, while yet the fumes arose, prepared new toils, and doubled woes on woes. Their prayers performed, the chiefs the rite pursue, the barley sprinkled, and the victim, that is the sacrifice, slew. The limbs they sever from the enclosing hide, the thighs selected to the gods divide. On these, in double calls involved with art, the choicest morsels lie from every part. From the cleft wood the crackling flames aspire, while the fat victims feed the sacred fire. the thighs of the steer thus sacrificed, and entrails dressed, the assistants part transfix and roast the rest, then spread the tables, the repast prepare, each takes his seat, and each receives his share. Soon as the rage of hunger was suppressed, the generous Nestor thus the prince addressed. So here we have a great lesson in Greek religion. We see how a sacrifice was celebrated. We see the purpose of a sacrifice. It's meant to procure the favor of the gods when someone's facing trouble. We see the sacrifice offered. The best parts of the sacrifice are given to the gods. It's as if there's a feast, and the gods are joining men at the feast. The sacrifice is made, the best portions are given to the god. They're consumed, basically. They're burned up as if the gods had consumed them. And then the rest of the sacrifice was divided and shared by all of those who participated in it. So it was a sacrificial offering, but also a sacrificial feast that was eaten by all of the people. After this is finished, the generous Nestor, the wise prince of Pylos, addressed, "Now bid thy heralds, messengers, sound the loud alarms, and call the squadrons sheathed in brazen." Just so you know, brazen means bronze. "Call the squadrons sheathed in brazen arms. Now seize the occasion, now the troops survey, and lead to war when heaven directs the way." We see Nestor too caught up in this deception. He spoke, the monarch issued his commands. Straight the loud heralds call the gathering bands. The chiefs enclose their king, the hosts divide, in tribes and nations ranked on either side. High in the midst the blue-eyed virgin flies. From rank to rank she darts her ardent eyes. The dreadful Aegis, Jove's immortal shield, blazed on her arm and lightened all the field. Round the vast orb 100 serpents rolled, formed the bright fringe, and seemed to burn in gold. With this each Grecian's manly breast she warns, swells their bold hearts, and strings their nervous arms. No more they sigh, inglorious to return home, but breathe revenge, and for the combat burn. As on some mountain, notice the simile, as on some mountain, through the lofty grove, the crackling flames ascend and blaze above. The fires expanding as the winds arise, shoot their long beams and kindle half the skies. So, from the polished arms and brazen shields, a gleamy splendor flashed along the fields. Not less their number than the embodied cranes, or milk-white swans in Aetius' watery plains, that o'er the windings of Caister's springs stretch their long necks and clap their rustling wings, now tower aloft and course in airy rounds, now light with noise the field resounds. Thus, in this way, numerous and confused, extending wide, the legions crowd Scamander's flowery side. With rushing troops the plains are covered o'er, and thundering footsteps shake the sounding shore. Along the river's level meads they stand, thick as in spring the flowers adorn the land, another simile. Or leaves the trees, or thick as insects play, the wandering nation of a summer's day, that, drawn by milky streams at evening hours, in gathered swarms surround the rural bowers. From pale to pale with busy murmur run the gilded legions glittering in the sun. Again, like swarms of insects, the soldiers gathered together, so thronged, so close, the Grecian squadrons stood in shining arms, and thirst for Trojan blood. Each leader now his scattered force conjoins, in close array and forms the deepening lines. Not with more ease the skillful shepherd swain collects his flocks from thousands on the plain. The King of Kings, majestically tall, towers o'er his armies and outshines them all. Note the image of an ancient king towering over his army, outshining them all. Another simile, like some proud bull that round the pastures leads his subject herds, the monarch of the Medes. Great as the gods, the exalted chief was seen, his strength like Neptune, and like Mars his mien. Jove o'er his eyes celestial glories spread, and dawning conquest played around his head. Say, virgins, seated round the throne divine, all-knowing goddesses, immortal nine, since earth's wide regions, heaven's unmeasured height, and hell's abyss hide nothing from your sight. So here Homer appeals to the nine virgins, that is the muses, the all-knowing goddesses. Since nothing is hidden from your sight, we wretched mortals lost in doubts below, but guess by rumor and but boast we know. Notice what Homer says here about human knowledge, that it's all doubtful, all uncertain. Oh, say, what heroes, fired by thirst of fame, or urged by wrongs to Troy's destruction came? To count them all demands 1,000 tongues, a throat of brass and adamantine or diamond-like, in other words, very, very strong lungs. Daughters of Jove, assist, inspired by you, the mighty labor dauntless I pursue. What crowded armies, from what climes they bring, their names, their numbers, and their chiefs I sing. So here, as the army gets prepared for battle, Homer wants to provide a catalog of the soldiers, of the ships. We see the catalog of the ships here, this label. And he says, well, how could I possibly do that? There's no way that I could rename all of the men who were there and all of the different groups and nations that had gathered to follow Agamemnon. Therefore, Homer appeals to the muses, just as he did at the opening of the poem. He appeals to the muses and asks for their inspiration. And so we're to understand, Homer would have us to understand that this catalog of the ships, as it's called, was revealed by the goddesses and is therefore not uncertain as human knowledge is, but is certain because it's a divine knowledge. Of course, when you're telling a story that's showing us that the gods deceive men, it throws a monkey wrench into this idea that the knowledge of the gods or from the gods is certain. How would we know that this knowledge is certain if the gods are willing to deceive us? That doesn't make much sense. But anyway, we have here the catalog of the ships, and we're not going to read this because it's like reading the genealogies in sacred scripture. You can read it if you'd like to, but it's just a list of all of the men and all of the different ships and groups that had gathered together in the Greek army. So we'll just scroll through this. It tells us the different cities they're from, how many ships and how many soldiers were present and things like that. So we'll just scroll down through this. I encourage you to skim it quickly. If you're going to read it, just skim it. Just become familiar with what's in it. You can see here we're talking about Ulysses and his men who came and joined the fight. So we just go through all the different groups that joined in the battle. And let's just see where this ends. This may take us near to the end of the book. We just continue through the catalog of ships. Let's pick up here on page 81 in the document. Now like a deluge, like a flood, covering all around, the shining armies sweep along the ground. Swift as a flood of fire when storms arise, floats the wild field and blazes to the skies. Earth groaned beneath them as when angry Jove hurls down the forky lightning from above. On Arime, when he the thunder throws and fires Typhoeus with redoubled blows, where Typhon, pressed beneath the burning load, still feels the fury of the avenging god. But various Iris, that is the goddess of the rainbow, Jove's commands to bear speeds on the wings of winds through liquid air. In Priam's porch the Trojan chiefs she found, the old consulting and the youths around. Polites' shape, the monarch's son she chose, who from Isetes' tomb observed the foes. High on the mound, from whence in prospect lay the fields, the tents, the navy, and the bay. In this dissembled form she hastes to bring the unwelcome message to the Phrygian king. So Iris goes ahead and tells the Trojans that the Greeks are coming. The unwelcome message she brings to the Phrygian king. It refers to Priam as Phrygian because that land was called Phrygia, where Troy was simply a city. She says, "Cease to consult. The time for action calls. War, horrid war, approaches to your walls. Assembled armies oft I have beheld, but ne'er till now such numbers charged a field. Thick as, simile, thick as autumnal leaves or driving sand, the moving squadrons blacken all the strand. Thou, godlike Hector, all thy force employ. Assemble all the united bands of Troy. In just array let every leader call. The foreign troops this day demands them all." So Iris reveals the coming of the Greeks to the Trojans and orders them to call their armies together and prepare for battle. This voice divine the mighty chief alarms. The council breaks, the warriors rush to arms. The gates unfolding pour forth all their train. Nations on nations fill the dusky plain. Men, steeds, that is horses, and chariots shake the trembling ground. The tumult thickens and the skies resound. Amidst the plain, in sight of Ilion, Troy, stands a rising mount, the work of human hands. This for Merine's tomb the immortals know, though called by Tea in the world below. Beneath their chiefs in martial order, and remember this word martial means military, so the martial arts are the military arts. Beneath this mount, their chiefs in martial military order here. The auxiliar troops, auxiliar means the supporting troops, and Trojan hosts, the armies, appear. The godlike Hector, high above the rest, shakes his huge spear and nods his plumy crest. In throngs around his native bands repair, and groves of lances glitter in the air. Divine Aeneas, that name is going to be very important because Aeneas is the subject of Virgil's Aeneid, which is another poem we're going to read in classical literature. So remember this name Aeneas, divine Aeneas, brings the Dardan race, Anchises' son, by Venus's stolen embrace. Born in the shades of Ida's secret grove, a mortal mixing with the queen of love. Archilochus and Acamas divide, the warrior's toils and combat by his side. Who fair Zelea's wealthy valleys till, fast by the foot of Ida's sacred hill, or drink Aesopus of thy sable flood, where led by Pandarus of royal blood. To whom his art Apollo deigned to show, graced with the presence of his shafts and bow. from rich Apesus and Adrestius towers, high Terces summits, and Pityea's bowers. From these the congregated troops obey, young Amphius and Adrastus equal sway, old Merop's sons, whom skilled in fates to come, the sire forewarned, and prophesied their doom. Fate urged them on. The sire forewarned in vain, they rushed to war and perished on the plain. From Practius' stream, Percote's pasture lands, and Sestos and Abydos, neighboring strands, from great Arisba's walls and Selle's coast, Asius Hyrtachides conducts his host. High on his car he shakes the flowing reins, his fiery coursers or war horses thunder o'er the plains. Notice this is similar to the catalog of ships. This is simply a description of all of the different peoples that gathered together around Hector to prepare for battle against the Greeks. So let's just move down through this. So we've got all of these Trojan soldiers and Trojan families and Trojan nations gathering together to support King Priam's cause and join Hector in battle. And this brings us to the end of Book 2. We read, "The forces last in fair array succeed, which blameless Glaucus and Sarpedon lead, the warlike bands that distant Lycia yields, where gulfy Xanthus foams along the fields." And this brings us to the end of Book 2. So, in Book 2, we've covered this in 2 videos. The first was about an hour long. This one is only going to be about 30 minutes. What we've seen, the story of Book 2, is the deception of Agamemnon and the preparation for war. So if you're taking notes, it's important to always keep the big picture in view. And in your assignments, you'll be asked things like, what is the subject of this reading, or to briefly summarize this reading. And you should remember and note that Book 2 is the deception of Agamemnon by Jupiter and the preparation for war between the Trojans and the Greeks. So that brings us to the end of Book 2. I hope that was a helpful guided reading. We moved pretty quickly through this second video just because we had this catalog of ships and this description of all of the different armies that joined together on the Trojan side. So not too much of the most important type of content for us to pay attention to, but significant historical context. So now as you consider the assignments to complete for these lessons, you'll be asked, what is the subject of this lesson? I've already told you. The book 2 is the deception of Agamemnon and the preparation for battle. You'll be asked about examples of what this lesson teaches us about Greek religion. We've seen a number of things with Greek religion. We've seen how the gods use dreams to either reveal things to men or to deceive men. We learned about the uncertainty of human knowledge and the idea that the gods know things for certain, but men are always doubtful and confused. We learned about what a Greek sacrifice looks like, what the purpose of a sacrifice was, how the sacrifice was conducted, and so on. We see the idea of intercession among the gods and men, another important religious lesson. You're asked in the assessment, what does this reading reveal about the history of Greece? We're learning the details of the Trojan War, but we've also seen a few introductions to significant historical characters like Ulysses, who becomes the subject of the Odyssey, which we're going to read later in this course. And we just ran into Aeneas as one of the Trojans, who's going to become the main character in Virgil's Aeneid, who's considered to be the founder of the Roman people. So some significant historical insights are gained in this reading. You'll be asked about figures of speech. One of the most prominent we've seen is the use of similes to illustrate things and add color, as it were, to the story. We see lots of use of these abbreviations for the sake of meter in the poetry, but remember, that's the work of Alexander Pope. That's not the work of Homer, even though if we were reading Greek, we would find examples of such things in Homer's Greek. But we see figures of speech used by the translator. Feel free to mention things like that. We saw some examples of alliteration. We obviously see rhyme. We see different kinds of rhyme. Let me see if I can see an example real quick here. I don't see the kind of thing I wanted to point out. Just give me 1 second, I'll find one. Just a second. Here's an example here. With great Euphemos, the Ciconians move, sprung from Troyzenian chaos, loved by Jove. Notice these two lines. They're considered rhyming, but if we look at the words that end the lines, they really don't rhyme in the true sense of a rhyme. We have the word move and Jove. So we have the same spelling, but different pronunciation. So this is a different kind of rhyme. So there are a number of different figures of speech and devices used both by Homer and by the translator, which you could note in your answers to questions about figures of speech. And then most importantly, you're going to be asked to summarize the reading, and again, remember that the two important points of Book 2 are the deception of Agamemnon and the preparation for battle. So I hope that's a helpful guide. I'd like to try to keep these videos as short as possible and ask that if you've got any questions as you read it, and I strongly encourage you to take the time to read these readings. These are great influential works of literature that if you gain a good mastery of them will help you in all future readings, because these ancient writings of these great ancient masters become the source for a lot of the material in future writings that you'll read. And so the more mastery, the greater mastery you have of the ancient writings, the more you'll be able to understand modern writings, because the modern writers were readers of the ancient classics. So take the time, do the reading, make yourself familiar with the texts themselves, and hopefully these videos can explain some things and give you a good sense of what you're reading about as you go along. If there's anything else you need help with, any questions you'd like to ask, you can post them on the student forums or just send them to me through tickets in the Help Center, and I'll respond to all of your questions. So please feel free to do so. I hope that's helpful. God bless your studies.